fear after sunset. The sun sinks behind the treeline, and with it, safety disappears. The warm glow of daylight, once scattered across a world filled with movement and sound, vanishes into murky twilight. There are no flashlights, no reinforced walls, just a ring of people, pressed close together, flinching at every rustle in the brush. Welcome to the Paleolithic night shift, where every rustle might be wind or might be death. Even now, sitting in your comfy chair or bed, or maybe stuck in traffic, it's hard to imagine how truly dark the night could be. No light pollution, no distant glow of cities, just the moon if you were lucky, and clouds didn't smother it like a bear smothers its prey. You couldn't see much, but you could definitely hear everything. And out there, something was always moving. Before we dive too deep into the shadows, let's take a second to prepare. You'll need courage, curiosity, and maybe a backup torch. So before you enjoy the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Also, let me know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Are you in a cave in Europe, a high ridge in South America, or let's be honest, on your phone in bed? Now, turn up the volume, and together let's begin today's journey of exploration. The group huddles around a fire. It's not just for warmth, though warmth matters, too. It's a line of defense, a shaky shield held against the endless unknown. One spark, born of friction or flint, has transformed the entire equation of survival. Fire gave humans not just heat or cooked meat, it gave them the night. Kind of. You see, the predators didn't vanish when humans learned to burn. The lions, yes, lions in Europe, the hyenas, the leopards, the bears, they didn't get the memo. They kept hunting. They just became smarter. And humans? They had to become smarter too. They learned to watch for the reflection of eyes in the dark. Learned to distinguish between the low groan of a tree and the throat-clearing cough of a stalking predator. They started sleeping in shifts, something modern humans still echo today. Ever notice how someone in a group always ends up staying awake longer, even unintentionally? And they built habits, systems, rituals. Around the campfire, children were told stories, some true, some wildly exaggerated, about creatures that came only when you stepped too far into the night. Don't go out, the elders would warn. The ground itself has teeth, and when you're 6 years old and shivering beside a smoldering log, that's not a metaphor. That's a promise. Some early hominins, like Homo erectus, began mastering fire nearly 1.5 million years ago. But it wasn't until much later that fire became a daily tool, rather than an occasional miracle. Once it did, evening behavior changed. Think of it as the prehistoric version of locking your doors at night. You didn't just go to sleep, you prepared. A typical night routine might include stacking thorny branches around the perimeter, nature's barbed wire, to keep out creeping animals. Others piled up stones or sticks soaked in sap to create smudge fires, not to repel beasts, but to drive off the real terror of the night. Insects. If you think mosquito bites are bad now, imagine them when you couldn't close a window. Fun fact, early humans in some regions crushed particular leaves or animal dung, yes, dung, and smeared it on their skin to mask their scent. Crocodile poop was a real option. That's right, prehistoric sunscreen and bug spray, all in one gloriously disgusting package. But even with fire and foliage and funk, danger was everywhere. One of the strangest and least understood nightly threats may have been megafaunal snakes. In parts of prehistoric South America and Africa, fossil evidence suggests that enormous constrictors could and did prey on early humans. Imagine dozing off and waking up mid-squeeze. It's not a comforting bedtime story, but it was someone's last one. So what did prehistoric people do? They adapted in ways that went beyond the physical. They changed mentally. Fear became something inherited, a kind of instinctual radar for threats. And over time, humans started thinking ahead. They didn't just respond to the dark. They began planning for it. Choosing campsites based on visibility, building fires and patterns that cast wider light, and establishing sleeping arrangements that kept the weakest, children, elders, the guy who kept forgetting his spear, safely in the middle. Even the early layout of sleeping circles hints at tactical awareness. Outer sleepers often had faster reaction times or were skilled with weapons. And they weren't just sleeping, they were listening. Any change in sound, the sudden silence of crickets, the shuffle of leaves, was enough to snap the group into full alertness. You think you're jumpy when your phone buzzes? Try waking up to the sound of a saber-tooth sniffing your toes. And if you're wondering whether early humans ever left the safety of the fire at night, yes, they did, but rarely alone, and usually with a torch, a spear, and someone promising, This'll just take a second. You can probably guess how that went. Let's just say, curiosity did not only kill the cat, but still they endured. Not because they eliminated danger, but because they learned to coexist with it. Fire wasn't invincibility, it was a negotiation with nature. It didn't say, stay back, so much as it whispered, we see you. By the end of a successful night, the fire might be low, ash hanging in the cold air, and the group still intact. If no one was missing, no one had to scream, and the only growling came from someone's stomach, then it was a good night. A safe one. Of course, tomorrow would bring new problems. Food, weather, rival groups, and the odd bear trying to nap where you nap. But for tonight, they'd survived. And that was everything. Circle of fire. The flames crackle and spit, throwing bursts of orange light into the darkness like desperate messengers. In a world where the night swallows sound and movement, fire was never just fire. It was protection, illusion, and sometimes the only reason someone woke up alive. After sunset, the wilderness didn't sleep, prowled. And for prehistoric humans, the circle of fire wasn't decorative, it was strategic. Each fire was placed with intent, not just to cook food or boil water, but to send a message to the eyes lurking beyond the treeline. We are awake. We are ready. We see you. The fire circle was more than one single blaze. In many cases, it involved multiple smaller fires, carefully positioned to extend light outward in a wider radius. The goal was to confuse predators. A single fire could be studied and circumvented. A ring of flickering, shifting light created uncertainty. To a cautious predator, especially one with sensitive night vision, that dancing halo looked like a trap. Prehistoric people even learned to manipulate the type of wood burned. Certain woods produced more smoke, others burned brighter or longer. Pine resin, for instance, made for intense, bright flames that startled animals and made sneaky approaches harder. One clever trick: tossing dried animal dung into the fire, something that released an acrid smoke many animals instinctively avoided. Plus, it kept biting insects away. And hey, who doesn't want their campfire to smell like a flaming buffalo bathroom? Now, not every fire circle was built in open terrain. Depending on the habitat, people adapted their methods. In dense forests, flames had to be small and controlled, so as not to ignite the entire neighborhood. In arid regions, where wind could scatter embers like confetti at a deadly birthday party, people built fire pits with rock barriers and dug shallow trenches. And in places where fuel was scarce, like tundras or rocky plains, every twig was precious. Fires there were modest, but meticulously tended, often kept going with preserved embers from the day before. But the circle wasn't just physical, it was psychological. It drew the community together. Within its radius, people laughed, sang, argued, made tools, and whispered stories they half believed. Some tales warned of creatures that feared fire, and others, perhaps less comforting, warned of those that didn't. Because here's the twist: not every predator backed away. Some species, like giant hyenas and cave lions, were far bolder than their modern cousins. These beasts didn't mind firelight if hunger burned hotter than fear. They'd stalk the edges of camp, patient and invisible. One moment, nothing. The next, chaos. That's why no one ever sat too far from the flames. There were no camp chairs. You earned your place by the fire, often by proving your worth with a hunt, a kill, or just pure bravery. Fun fact: archaeologists have found ancient fire rings with distinct scorch patterns in cave floors, indicating where people regularly sat. These carbon stains suggest group patterns, elder seats, toolmakers' areas, even a kind of early storytelling zone. You could almost call it a Paleolithic podcast studio. And what happened when the fire died? That was a real emergency. Losing fire at night wasn't like running out of batteries. It meant cold, fear, and an open invitation to any fanged opportunist. People were assigned to fire duty. Not the most glamorous job, but arguably the most critical. You snoozed, the fire died, the hyenas dined. Motivation was high, so fire wasn't just managed, it was protected. Carried even. Imagine that. Walking miles through hostile terrain while guarding a glowing ember bundle, nestled in dry moss and wrapped in bark. Like delivering pizza, if the pizza were life itself. But the circle also had another function: social control. When you're part of a fragile tribe of 10, 20, maybe 30 people, everyone counts. The fire's glow helped enforce communal rules. You couldn't steal food, whisper betrayal, or act out without eyes on you. In many ways, fire was the first spotlight. It made honesty visible. And then there was the illusion factor. Fire played tricks on animals' eyes, just like it does ours. Shadows leapt and twisted. Movement became ambiguous. To a lion, the ring of fire could look like a mob of people, not just 10 tired humans with aching feet and a half-cooked rabbit. It bought time, and time was priceless. Still, every now and then, illusion failed. Some animals simply didn't care. Take the short-faced bear. Massive, aggressive, and curious. If it smelled meat or fear, it might crash right through the light, immune to superstition. And when that happened, it was every human for themselves, or preferably everyone for each other. Because here's the core truth. The fire circle was about togetherness. The lone wanderer trope doesn't apply here. Surviving the night meant sharing warmth, watching backs, and trusting that the guy next to you wasn't going to roll over and smother the only torch with his mammoth skin blanket. It meant taking turns poking the logs. It meant listening for that subtle shift in wind that carried danger on it. It meant handing your child a glowing stick and saying, "Stay inside the light. Don't ever step beyond it." And the child would nod, because even without understanding, they knew, outside the circle, nothing was safe. Eventually, the fire would die down, not completely but to embers. The last watchers would stoke it gently, whispering their own small prayers into the smoke. Maybe to ancestors, maybe to gods, maybe just to the night. And somewhere, in the dark, something with claws would turn and walk away. Not because it couldn't strike, but because the light was just bright enough to make it hesitate. Caves, cliffs, and cleverness. The flicker of firelight only went so far. Beyond that glowing ring was blackness, and that's where the cleverness of early humans really shone. As vital as the fire circle was, it wasn't their only defense. You see, the location of your nighttime shelter could be the difference between waking up and not waking up at all. Let's imagine it. You're a member of a prehistoric band moving across a rugged landscape. The sun's sinking, and the urgency in the group rises. It's time to find a place to sleep. But you can't just crash anywhere. Lying down on open ground was like volunteering to be part of the food chain. So what did our ancestors do? They picked their sleeping spots with the tactical precision of a military general crossed with a real estate agent. Elevation mattered. Sleeping higher up meant you had a better vantage point. It also reduced the number of approaches an animal could take to reach you. A cliffside perch, especially with natural stone overhangs, gave you only one or two ways to be attacked instead of, all directions. And if the path up was narrow or slippery, even better. Because that meant predators had to come single file, which made defending the group a whole lot easier. Caves were obviously the real estate gold standard. Dry, elevated, insulated, and sometimes even scenic, if you like your scenery in charcoal mammoth outlines. But caves came with their own risks. They weren't always empty. Bears loved caves. So did lions. So before moving in, a prehistoric inspection team, probably the brave cousin with nothing to lose, would check for bones, fur, or fresh scat. Because nobody wanted to build a fire and unpack their belongings, only to discover their new cave came with a 1,000-pound roommate. Strangely enough, not all groups used caves regularly. Some regions didn't have caves, and in other places, people preferred shelters they could build or adapt. Enter the cliff edge camp. These were areas where people constructed basic windbreaks out of stone or bone, often against rock walls. Some sites even show evidence of shallow dugouts beneath ledges, where families nestled together under mammoth hide canopies weighted down with rocks. Cozy, if you ignored the occasional cold breeze or falling rock. Then there were forests. Thick trees offered some camouflage, and the canopy could trap heat, but visibility was poor, and big cats loved that kind of environment. So what did humans do? They got creative. Some built platforms in trees, not quite treehouses, but raised sleeping nests lined with leaves and branches. Yes, like our primate cousins. And yes, someone probably fell out once in a while. Gravity, it turns out, is as old as fear. In grassy plains or wide open tundra, cover was sparse, so defense was about distance. These groups often chose open areas with long lines of sight, so they could see anything coming from far away. It sounds counterintuitive, but when you know you're vulnerable, at least you can prepare. They'd sleep in tight circles, with outer guards lying down with spears in hand, like furry, grunting alarm systems. And in wetter regions like swamps or riversides, it got interesting. People sometimes built simple raised platforms above marshy ground, using woven branches. Wetland camps had the benefit of fewer large predators. Turns out, saber-toothed cats weren't big fans of wet feet. But of course, then you had snakes, bugs, and the occasional accidental midnight swim. Trade-offs. One strange detail. There's some evidence that in places where cave options were slim, people used massive animal bones, like mammoth tusks and ribcages, to construct dome-shaped shelters. Imagine that. A house made of ancient bones, glowing with firelight, standing silently under the stars. It's as eerie as it is ingenious. And if you're wondering whether the smell ever fully went away, let's just say it built character. Regardless of the terrain, though, humans paid attention to sound. If an area echoed too easily, it meant stealthy predators could creep up without warning. If water rushed too loudly nearby, it might drown out the footfalls of something heavy and hungry. So they often picked spots with balanced acoustics. Not too silent, not too noisy. The Goldilocks zone of terror. And let's not forget weather. A beautiful cave with a perfect view of the sunset was no good if it turned into a wind tunnel at night, or flooded during rain, or attracted bats. No offense to bats, but prehistoric people didn't have the luxury of rabies shots or tiny bat-sized eviction notices. So how did they test a spot? One method might have been to leave temporary markers, stones or sticks arranged in certain ways, to warn other groups that a site was unsafe. Another trick. Sending in the dogs. Well, okay, not fully domesticated dogs, but early human-animal companions like wolves or tame jackals. These animals often slept near the edge of camp, and if they refused to settle in a certain spot, it was a red flag. Animals have instincts, like, don't sleep next to the cave where the wind smells like bear breath. And then, of course, there were the people themselves, the ultimate censors. Over generations, stories were passed down about which areas were cursed or bad luck, which likely meant, hey, we almost got eaten there once. Oral history wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. If Grandpa said, don't camp near the Whispering Stones, you didn't camp near the Whispering Stones, unless you were trying to get famous in someone else's campfire tale. So between cliffs, caves, platforms, and plains, prehistoric people adapted brilliantly. They turned geography into strategy. They used bone, wood, and instinct to build safe zones in a world that absolutely did not want them to be safe. And while their shelters might not have had heated floors, Wi-Fi, or double-paned windows, they had something far more valuable: intentional design. Next time you complain about your lumpy mattress or your neighbor's late-night karaoke, just remember, you could be sleeping on a rock ledge, wrapped in animal fur, hoping the wind doesn't carry your scent to the hyena that's been circling since dusk. The sound of survival. The night wasn't quiet. Not in the way we imagine it from a peaceful camping trip or a soundproof room. For prehistoric humans, the night was a living, breathing thing, full of motion, voices, and whispers that didn't come from people. And when your eyes couldn't help you anymore, sound became the difference between safety and something large with claws. Inside the safety of their shelters, be it a firelit cave or a high cliff ledge, prehistoric people listened. Every crack of a branch, every distant hoot or howl was interpreted like a language. And it wasn't paranoia. It was a survival mechanism honed over thousands of years. They knew which sounds were harmless. The low croak of frogs, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional snore from an uncle with the lung power of a mammoth. But when things went silent, when the crickets stopped chirping and even the wind held its breath, that was when the group tensed. Because something out there was hunting, and it wasn't them. Here's a fascinating truth. Humans were, and still are, incredibly sensitive to auditory cues in the dark. Studies suggest our brains actually boost audio processing when vision is limited. It's not a superpower, it's adaptation. Imagine you're sitting beside a dying fire, wrapped in furs, eyes straining into blackness. Suddenly, you hear a slow crunch of gravel from just beyond the light. You don't see anything, but your brain maps it, large, low to the ground, cautious. Probably not a deer, probably not good. But sound wasn't only about listening. Early humans made sounds strategically at night. Strange, right? You'd think silence would be safer. But in many cases, making noise was exactly what kept them alive. Take rhythmic drumming, for example. Not the kind with fancy drums, but tapping sticks, stones, or bones together in consistent patterns. This served two purposes. It soothed the group, especially children, and it signaled to predators that the camp was alert, active, and full of awake, noisy humans with pointy sticks. Nocturnal animals preferred silence. A camp filled with sudden claps, shouts, or even laughter wasn't an easy target. Then there were songs. Yes, prehistoric lullabies existed. Mothers would hum to their children, not just to help them sleep, but to maintain calm. And these sounds spread a message. We are here. We are together. Even storytelling at night, with its natural pauses and rises in tone, created a wall of human presence that, when coupled with firelight, projected strength. One strange, lesser-known technique was mimicry. Some groups learned to imitate the warning calls of certain animals, like birds or even monkeys, to scare off potential threats. Picture this. You're a predator, stalking a quiet camp, when suddenly you hear a sharp, shrieking sound that usually means danger nearby. Even if you're hungry, your instincts tell you, maybe not tonight. Sound was also used for coordination. Imagine someone on the outer edge of camp hears a suspicious movement. Shouting outright might trigger a chase, but clicking a stone twice or whistling a specific pitch, that's code. It might mean, I heard something, or stay close to the fire. These were early warning systems passed down like family recipes. If your family recipes involved how not to be eaten. And don't forget the animals. Dogs or proto-dogs played a huge role in nighttime defense. These early canine companions weren't just pets, they were audio alarms. Their barks, growls, or even the way they pricked up their ears could alert the entire group. In many cases, they heard threats long before any human did. It's entirely possible that the first reason people tamed wolves wasn't hunting, it was night security. But communication wasn't all serious. Laughter, surprisingly, might have played a defensive role too. Not just because it built trust or relieved stress, but because it signaled confidence. Predators seek weakness. A quiet, huddled group seems vulnerable. A laughing, relaxed group seems unpredictable. In nature, unpredictable often equals dangerous. Of course, sometimes noise could backfire. Babies cried. Someone dropped a stone. A child sneezed at the wrong moment. And just like that, a lurking predator might make its move. That's why early shelters had quiet zones. People positioned sleeping areas for the most vulnerable in the quietest, safest parts of the shelter, often closer to the fire and surrounded by others. And if the worst happened, if a predator did breach the perimeter, the noise strategy shifted from gentle to thunderous. Chaos was its own defense. Screaming, banging weapons, tossing rocks, even mimicking larger animal sounds. Anything to confuse the attacker and scare it off. Prehistoric people didn't have war horns, but they had lungs, rocks, and a deep understanding that fear works both ways. Over time, these nighttime behaviors evolved into tradition. Entire tribes developed nighttime protocols, passed through generations, not in writing, but in habit. When the sun dipped below the horizon, certain rituals began. Someone checked the fire, someone tested the drums, someone posted near the edge with a sharpened spear. Someone made a joke, because fear's power lessens when you laugh. And someone else made sure the group remembered the last time things didn't go according to plan. Modern humans may sleep behind walls with alarms, locked doors, and motion sensor lights, but deep down, the instincts remain. That flinch at a creaking floorboard, that startle when something howls outside, that sigh of relief when the dog starts barking, before something gets too close. And just like their ancestors, modern people still gather around sources of warmth and light, still tell stories after dark, still listen for the world beyond the firelight. Because no matter how far we've come, sound still matters in the dark. And survival still sings nightmares with fur and fangs. It always began the same way. A sudden stillness in the forest, the scent of ash from the fire, and then, just beyond the ring of flickering light, a pair of glowing eyes. For prehistoric humans, these moments weren't stories told to scare children. They were real encounters. The night was alive with apex predators, and humans, clever as they were, didn't always sit at the top of the food chain. Out there in the darkness were creatures with sharp teeth, thick fur, and very little fear. And some of them were hungry. Let's start with one of the most feared nighttime visitors, the saber-toothed cat, or Smilodon. You've probably seen the museum skeletons, all fangs and menace. But in the flesh, these cats were bulky, muscular, and terrifyingly stealthy. They could creep through brush so quietly you'd never hear them, until you did. With canines nearly 8 inches long, these predators didn't just kill, they ended you in silence. And yes, they hunted at night. What made them especially dangerous was their patience. Saber-tooths weren't reckless. They watched, waited. They could track human camps from a distance, knowing that hunger or exhaustion would eventually make someone stray from the group. And that's when the cat would strike with terrifying speed. Then there were the cave hyenas, larger and far more aggressive than today's spotted hyenas. These weren't scavengers, they were bold, coordinated pack hunters. And they had a nose for human settlements. If one found a group, others followed. The sounds of cackling laughter in the night weren't funny. They were a death sentence. Early humans learned that hyenas tested perimeters repeatedly, probing for weaknesses like fuzzy velociraptors with an attitude problem. Of course, not all threats came on 4 legs. Some slithered, In tropical and subtropical areas, humans shared their world with massive constrictors like the now extinct titanoboa, and later large species of rock pythons and anacondas. These snakes didn't need fangs or speed. All they needed was for you to fall asleep outside the circle just once. One squeeze and it was over. In fact, some groups developed night guards specifically to watch for ground movement. Yes, humans literally assigned someone to watch for snakes. And then there were the short-faced bears. Massive, prehistoric brutes who could stand over 11 feet tall. These guys didn't sneak up. They didn't stalk. They announced their arrival, often by crashing through brush or roaring as they approached. Why? Because they weren't afraid of anything. Not humans. Not fire. Not even logic. If a bear like that wandered into your camp, it wasn't a battle. It was an eviction notice. So how did early humans survive this zoological nightmare? The answer: they got smarter, faster, meaner. First, they created decoys. In some regions, humans would set up fake sleeping figures, stuffed animal hides shaped roughly like a person, to bait or mislead predators. If a predator attacked the decoy, it would give the real humans time to flee or counterattack. Primitive? Yes. Brilliant? Also yes. Next, they developed early warning systems. No, not laser tripwires, but the prehistoric equivalent. Bones or dry sticks arranged in key paths around the camp. If stepped on, they snapped loudly, alerting the group. Others hung shells or stones from tree branches, creating clattering alarms with the slightest movement. One group in what's now Europe even used shallow pits, not deep enough to trap a predator, but enough to make them stumble and give humans time to react. And then came weapons. You might think throwing a stick at a saber-toothed cat was a death wish. But these weren't just sticks. They were fire-hardened spears, often tipped with stone or bone. Some were designed to break inside the body of a predator, brutal, yes, but effective. Others were hurled from a distance using atlatls, a kind of throwing lever that gave the spear extra velocity and range. One historically accurate fact that might surprise you: some of the oldest stone-tipped spears are over 400,000 years old, predating even Homo sapiens. That means weapon-making was already part of the human story long before writing, farming, or even real pants. But not every defense was physical. Some was psychological. People painted terrifying symbols at cave entrances, not just art, but warnings. They sang battle songs before sleep, shouted into the dark, or told exaggerated stories of human warriors who killed bears with their bare hands. Confidence, even if a bit performative, was a defense in itself. Animals are perceptive. A terrified camp looks different than a loud, united one. One lesser-known tactic? Scent manipulation. Some groups deliberately spread the urine or feces of larger predators, like lions, around their camp. The idea was to make it smell like a top predator had already claimed the territory. Sure, it's a little gross, but so is getting eaten by a leopard. Perspective matters. And finally, there was community. The best defense wasn't a single warrior, it was a group. Nighttime defense was a team sport. Everyone had a role. The old man with the bum knee? He knew the animal sounds. The young warrior? He patrolled with a torch. The children? They stayed close and silent. Survival came not from strength alone, but from unity. When morning came, and the predators melted back into the brush, the group would count heads. If no one was missing, and only one or two wooden alarms were tripped, it was considered a win. Some people even marked safe nights by scoring stones, painting cave walls, or offering thanks to whatever spirits they believed guarded them in the dark. Because every night survived was a small miracle. Today, we tell these stories around safe campfires or in cozy rooms, far from the fangs and shadows of our past. But in the bones of our ancestors, and perhaps in the way we still check over our shoulders in the dark, the memory remains. The wilderness, the night, the predators, they shaped us. And thanks to cleverness, courage, and a whole lot of fire, we made it through the dark.